Hello! Our story continues on the planet of Solest, just outside the mid-rim and in the outer rim. In space, there was a large space battle. The Republic was holding their own control over the planet. In space, Master Jedi was leading the entire firefight. It was a massive clashing between two fleets. Since the beginning of the war, Jera and Luna became more battle-heavy Jedi. They lost many clones, but they were subsequently upgraded to be fit into a position of more active combat. This again, stemming from Jara's need to be a part of the High Council, especially since the death of Master Adi on the planet of Florum, though she never received any consideration. All the other choices did indeed become council members over Jara, which led her to be a bit more distasteful towards her 16-year-old student and a little bit more cold towards her men during active combat. Luna, on the other hand, while not in agreement with active combat, embraced it for one and only one reason. It was because she wanted to serve and protect her brothers. Similarly to her older brother and Titus, Luna got along really well with the clones. They all loved her and treated her like one of their own. They didn't do this in front of General Kron because, well, she was General Kron, but for the moment they were working in unison on the ground in Solest. There was a small invasion force that got to the ground thanks to some HMP gunships and several Vulture droids working against the Republic fighter cover. The HMPs dropped off several waves of B-2 battle droids, and even more than that, the HMPs continued to bombard civilians. The clones on the ground were working quick to save civilians, and once all the civilians were relocated, the clones focused more on taking down the HMPs. As Luna got older, she was able to focus more in her form too, and she got incredibly good at it. Luna was a confident commander at this point in her young career. She was leading the charge next to a volcanic river. The planet of Solest was full of lava and volcanoes, just not nearly as much as Mustafar, but close enough. The clones got behind her as she ordered rocket troopers to take down the HMPs. The B-2s on the ground began releasing heavy cover fire, but Luna was able to take care of that. Three of her men and her began pushing forward on an assault on the B-2s. The super battle droids were one hell of an opponent, and the clones took great care in their approach to fighting these battle droids. All of a sudden, a group of tanks were dropped off on the ground, one of them being a DDT. Luna knew this weapon. She'd seen it once before, but her and Jara took it out before it could fire its weapon. Luna told the men to make a push forward and see if the admiral above could risk a wing of bombers for the ground assault. As Luna and her men made a push forward, a blast from an AAT crushed into a medical base facility. The medical facility held just not clones, but also civilians, and it was about to crash down into a volcanic river. Luna stopped in her tracks, blocking blaster fire. She saw the building begin to lose balance, and she called out to her men. She told them to get to the medical facility and get everyone out. She would make sure the facility didn't crash into the river. All the clones knew exactly what Commander Luna was doing. She was risking the entire mission for a bunch of civilians. If this failed, then it would go terribly, but she couldn't afford to let innocents and wounded be killed under no will of their own. Luna turned around and covering her men as they climbed up to the small walkway towards the facility. When they got into the building, it began to shake more. There were dozens of wounded individuals in here. The clones began rushing the civilians out of the structure to the other side, as the AAT blasted the rocks again, dropping the structure, shaking everybody inside of it. Luna sheathed her lightsaber and began running under the building, catching it with all of her strength. The clones on the other side saw this as they ran forward to make sure that everyone got out. But with the way the building was shaped, the clones would have to go into the structure and retrieve those too weak to leave. Luna pushed with all of her might as her face turned red. The building was applying so much pressure to her that her boots began to sink towards the volcanic river behind her. She was mere meters away from burning up herself. She could feel the heat against her back. Luna took a step forward, bending her knee and losing some of her momentum as the building began shifting again. The AAT fired again, this time at the ATTE, approaching the field of combat. The DDT, on the other hand, was about to fire the killing blow, a blast that would kill all the clones, all the civilians in the area, and also Luna. And before they did, Jera Kron flew down and blasted the weapon with a torpedo, and while she flew by, she could see her student not following orders, giving up the mission. As the ATTE pushed forward, the other droid tanks began to receive critical damage, and the B-2 battle droids were being shot to pieces by the few clones that were currently covering Luna. The building slipped some more, and Luna fell to her knees. The heat of the lava was even more painful than it was before. It felt like sticking fiery iron against her skin, and she cried out. The last wounded individual was carried out of the building, and so Luna released the building and leapt to the side, slamming down behind a rock, breathing heavily, trying to catch her breath. The clones nearby, still firing at the remaining battle droids, told her to stay down. A medic ran over to her as the building crashed into the lava and asked if she was feeling alright, or if she was hurt. She rolled to her side and said that her back felt like it was on fire. It burned. The clone took a cooling pad and placed it on the back of her robes, telling her that she'd feel a shock in about 3, 2, 1. She jumped and told the medic that she was way too cold now. He laughed as he told her in a witty tone that he and the boys would finish off the rest of the mission for her. Luna moved to her knees and then got off the ground. pushing off of a dominant knee to her feet. She looked at the clones and grinned, telling them that not if she took out the clankers first. Luna ignited her lightsaber and yelled, running forward. The clones behind her jumped to their feet and followed her into battle against the remaining battle droids. Luna and her men cut down the remaining battle droids, and when they were finished, they awaited orders from the general, who was busy finishing up her own battle in space. The clones all thanked Luna for saving the lives of civilians and their brothers that were wounded. They all appreciated her for what she did. One of the clones came running back to tell the men that all the fleets were being requested. Luna asked what was wrong. The soldier said that Coruscant was under attack. Luna turned back and looked up. Using her long-range binoculars, she saw the fight in space getting more and more intense. Luna looked back at the men and told them that she was going to aid her master in the fight above. The men nodded their head, and as their commander abandoned post and jumped into a starfighter and shot into the air. Luna spun her ship around as it sped through the atmosphere and into active combat. Luna found a wing of Vulture droids and plowed through them, following them around one of the many capital ship Venators. The Vulture droids were chasing down a wing of ARC 170s. As Luna took out the droid fighters, the clones and the ARCs cheered happily, spinning away from the combat to take their shots at the Separatist support ships. Luna flew around to get behind some V-wings on her master to assist the fighter combat. Luna called over to her master and asked if they would be going to Coruscant. Jara told her that they would be, as she ripped through a group of hyena bombers. The admiral of the fleet called out to the two Jedi and told them that he was splitting the fleet's resources. They'd be able to win the battle with half the fleet. Master Jara and Luna sped away from the main combat with a couple wings of starfighters as they landed inside of the Venator, and then this new half of the fleet jumped to hyperspace towards Coruscant. Over Seleucami, a fleet entered combat. Master Quinlan Voss was currently clearing out house on Seleucami before he and his troopers moved towards Boz Pity. Master Usk and Jedi Knight Titus were heading out to Seleucami to assist in Master Voss's campaign. Master Usk and Titus were sent to Seleucami before Coruscant was invaded, and when they got there, they had only learned about the attack. However, they were in no position to be of any assistance to Coruscant's assault. The 73rd had greatly expanded its resources, and their fleet was much larger, with Captain Nearest becoming Commodore. Regardless, their entire operation was here to assist Master Voss, who is currently leading an invasion on the ground of Seleucami. The battle was going really well, actually, and they were really close to securing the next foot of this campaign. Quinlan's campaign had been going on ever since he returned to Coruscant from his little expedition to Christophsis, which ended up costing the life of Asajj Ventress at the hands of Count Dooku. Quinlan would have liked to get revenge on Dooku, but at this point, it was far too late. Dooku was dead, but the Battle of Coruscant was still going on. While Usk and Titus had great reinforcements, the Separatist fleet above Seleucami was retreating to Boz Pity as one final stand against the Republic in this particular sector of the galaxy. Back on Coruscant, another fleet arrived out of hyperspace, but when Luna and Jara looked forward, there was nothing to see but the wreckage of the Separatist fleet, and a couple of new vessels. The Republic Star Destroyer. Neither Jedi had ever seen or heard of these vehicles before, but they were massive ships. They were much larger than any Venator, and they were clearly built for fleet-to-fleet combat. Luna found this particularly weird, especially if the Republic was getting ready to win the war anyways. Sure, earlier in the war it would have made more sense to produce vehicles of such magnitude, but right now it seemed kind of pointless. Regardless, Master Kron told Luna that they were heading to the Jedi Temple. They had a meeting with the High Council. Luna nodded her head, and the two Jedi took their starfighters down to the surface of the planet and landed inside the Jedi Temple. Luna had a weird vibe about everything. Something felt really off about this trip to the Council chambers, but they walked forward. Luna looked around with a smile on her face. She was so happy to be back home. The war had changed a lot about her, but nothing changed the feelings that being back inside the temple invoked for her. She was surrounded by everything she grew up around. It reduced the tension and anxiety that the war gave her. Master Jar opened the door and the two of them stepped into the elevator. When they arrived inside the council chambers, Luna saw Anakin Skywalker. He looked a bit glum, so she smiled at him. He nodded back at her. Luna got a little giddy inside. Everyone knew Anakin Skywalker, not because he was a chosen one, but because he was a hero of the Republic. He was so well known across the entire galaxy. Luna felt so bad for what happened to Ahsoka. Everyone in the temple knew about it, and truthfully, Luna wished that she could have been Anakin's apprentice, but it had to be Ahsoka Tano, who got the train with Anakin or whatever. Regardless, Luna turned her attention to the Master of the Order and the Grand Master as she bowed. Mace Windu asked Luna to describe her insubordination during the Battle of Solest. Luna's eyes shot open as she asked what the Master of the Order was talking about. He explained in layman's terms that she didn't listen to her orders, and he asked why she didn't listen to her master. Luna asked which orders. She was trying to serve her men in the best way she could. Windu looked at the report and said, according to the report, Luna had abandoned the battle to deal with an unrelated matter, and on the other hand, she continued to abandon the battle by getting into her starfighter and leave her troops on the ground without orders to do so. Luna looked up at her master with a glare. She turned back to the Jedi Masters and told them that she was saving a collection of civilians from falling into a volcanic river. A building was falling over, and she was saving them because no one else could. And then, she continued saying that she only left the planet because they were done on the ground. Mace stopped and looked at Master Jara and asked if this was true. Master Kron told Mace Windu that she never gave any explicit orders for Luna to leave the ground, not to mention that Jara had to save Luna and her men from the DDT. The council members looked at each other. Mace looked back at Luna and told her that the council would put her on leave from active combat for 3 weeks. She'd be able to return to where her men were stationed when the time was up. Luna was outraged. This was unfair. It was ludicrous because it was a setup. Jara bowed and pushed her student towards the elevator. When they got into the elevator, Master Kron told her student that next time she should think twice before committing insubordination against a general, let alone her Jedi Master. Luna tried to speak up for herself, but Jara interrupted her, asking if she would have done the same thing if Master Windu had been there or if Master Kenobi had been there. Or about what if Commander Neo or Commander Wolf had been there? Would she have disobeyed their orders? Luna said that the battle was over once more before Jara told her student that she had a lot to reflect on before she'd be welcomed back aboard the flagship again. Luna bowed to her master and walked away. She was outraged. Though Jara had been getting consistently worse throughout the Clone Wars, her behavior towards just about anyone who could breathe on their own was nothing short of overzealous ridicule for doing something slightly different or simply non-protocol. The clones despised her, and they felt terrible for Luna, because the clones didn't have to face a quarter of the brunt that Luna took from her master. Luna really took almost all the heat for the clones. Jara left the temple to return to the fleet over Coruscant and then back to Solest so that they could finish off the war. Luna walked through the halls of the temple. It was really beautiful. She looked up at the pillars and down at the lovely carpets. Luna carried on towards her room, and when she laid down, she actually felt peace. Luna never wanted to be on the front lines. She only embraced it because her men were counting on her. When she wasn't on the front lines, that wasn't really her concern. She also didn't want to be around her master, who aged like a sarlacc pit, only getting grosser and more disgusting by the day. Filled with sourness and bitterness, she was truly repulsive, so for Luna, getting 3 weeks away from her master sounded like a good deal. Truthfully, Luna was just waiting to become a Jedi Knight. When she became a Knight, she could completely ignore her master and do whatever she pleased. Luna laid her head back on the bed, daydreaming of the day that would come, and when this would all be over and she'd be free from Master Jara. The day couldn't come soon enough. But judging by her master's demeanor towards her, she'd likely have to wait another 9 or 10 years before she could become a Jedi Knight, but that's fine. Luna was tough. All of her thoughts lived in the future, and she smiled before falling asleep in the comfort of her own room. Rather than a bunker, the trenches, or just about anywhere else she had to get comfortable to sleep during the war. In the mid-rim, Luna's brother was standing in a gunship. The campaign on Boz Pity was beginning. The gunship rattled back and forth, dodging flak. The space above Boz Pity was going really well, as the Republic fleet ambushed the remaining separatists, retreating. To the members of the Republic, it looked like the droid forces had nothing left. The Outer Rim sieges were leading the Republic towards victory. No one apart from the Republic knew of how many forces the CIS really had, but from this vantage point, it looked like they were dwindling in forces. As the gunships got closer, one of them was clipped out of the sky. Ground forces that were defending the surface of Boz Pity were friendly in firing range, and several wings of Vulture droids that were docked on the planet activated and prepared for battle. The clone gunships got to the surface with their V-Wing escort, before the Republic fighters broke off and began an air dogfight with the Separatist forces. In space, Commodore Nereus led the Republic heavy cruisers into what at the moment looked like to be a victory. On the ground, the LAATs landed and the clones leapt out of their vessels, and clones ran forward. Calling out orders to all their men, the 3 Jedi generals ignited their weapons and ran forward into combat, leading the charge. The best part about this combined effort under Master Voss is that all the 3 Jedi present were on the front line. None of these Jedi shied away from being on the front line with their men. Every single Jedi ran forward, blocking blaster fire and entering combat. With the troops landed, the back of the LAATs opened up and waves of AT-RTs began deploying. The Republic forces were immediately met with stiff resistance, Separatist AATs to be specific. Droid tanks laid down suppressive fire, but with the light walkers, the Republic was able to get quickly to counter. Behind the LAATs were a bunch of walker transports dropping off a number of ATTEs to crush the droid forces. Quinlan led the men to the front lines with Master Usk. On the other side of the flank, Titus and Captain Poison moved in together. They were as close as Jedi Commander and Clone Captain could be. They moved in synchronization with each other, never missing a beat. It was almost like Poison had himself the Force as well. The Republic was breaching the city here on Boz Pity. It was a layered assault. The purpose of it was to secure the city and capture the planet. Then, be back on Coruscant in time for the victory parade. The battle continued, but the droid forces inside the city were tougher than expected. With the ATTEs present on the battlefield, the Republic was able to shift their odds into their favor by knocking out the heavy tanks on the outside of the city gates. But for the street combat, the ATTEs couldn't actually get in. That was their issue. The ATRTs were great little walkers, but they didn't pack a punch. They were typically for recon or support, but if they came across an AAT inside the city, they'd be shredded. Voss and Usk cracked the far side of the flank and got into the city gates within the first day of combat. As nighttime came around, the fighting decreased, though on the other side of the city, where Poison and Titus were, they were still fighting. The group of clones didn't have any support because they were going through the underbelly of the city itself. The sewers had an entry point into the center of the city, where a couple of the higher up separatist leaders were hiding. Not the ones that were currently en route to Mustafar after leaving Utapau before the battle began. The unlucky part of being in the sewers is the fact that they were littered with advanced battle droids. There were groupings of commandos and B-2 super battle droids, and it wasn't exactly the most defended area of combat, which also doesn't even begin to explain the horrid smell down there. Poison and Titus worked together until the middle of the night, where they found a nice area to settle down for the night. The war looked to be coming to a close very soon. There was nothing that stopped the Republic from achieving this victory here, though being pinned down the sewers wasn't exactly the reward the troops were looking for. In the middle of the night, Captain Poison woke up his brother. Titus's eyes were bloodshot. He asked what was going on. He said that they were picking up encrypted clone comm chatter, referring to the destruction of General Grievous at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi. It seemed like the Clone Wars were closer than ever to being over. Titus smiled as he smacked Poison on the shoulder, telling him this was the best news ever. Titus nearly had an interaction with General Grievous on the battlefield during the middle of the war, but he luckily avoided it thanks to the presence of General Kenobi, who saved his life from the droid general. It was one of those only times Titus ever interacted with Master Kenobi. Titus got up and asked Poison if they should make a late night push. The captain told his friend that Titus was the commander, not him. Titus pushed Poison and said that he was just trying to be friendly. The two of them had an inseparable bond, and Poison knew what Titus meant, but he still wanted to give him a hard time about it all. Poison woke up all of his brothers and they gathered up the rest of the unit, preparing them to continue their assault. Titus was looking around the corner using a night vision reader to see where the droids were. He noticed that there was a pathway up to the city streets. They would likely have a better chance up there than with a number of commander droids and wrist rocket wielding clankers down here in the sewers. Titus called over the Poison and told them that there was a clear path towards the city over there. It wouldn't lead to the center of the city, but it would lead up to the streets. Poison saw it and he thought this was a good idea. On the far side of the city, the clones and the Jedi were bunkered down. The heavy walkers got as far as they could into the outskirts of the city, and the ramparts the Jedi set themselves up on were highly defended. Master Usk and Voss were sleeping, as were the rest of the troops aside from the guard, keeping patrol for this part of the night. Everything was still. There was no sound of blaster fire, nor the sound of droids marching. An explosion sounded off on the other side of the city, though it didn't wake up the troops. It was Poison and Titus. The Jedi Knight was blocking blaster shots away from his men in the sewers as they ascended the ladder into the city streets themselves. The clones that were getting topside were making sure that the perimeter was clear. It was, though the explosion that opened up the sewers to the city streets was very loud. The sound of an AAT moving around could be heard, but the clones didn't know what side of the city it was coming from. They heard rolling. It was a number of destroyer droids. After every clone got to the surface of the city streets, they provided covering fire while Titus jumped up the ladder, using the force to propel himself up faster. When he got to the city streets, he lit his lightsaber, blocking strikes by the destroyer droids. Titus called out Poison to ready the droid poppers. The clones were the droid poppers, and Titus used the force to push the destroyers off balance, allowing the droid poppers to roll underneath their shields, detonating and shutting them down. A massive blast sounded off, cutting through the building next to them as the structure began to crumble. Titus told his men to get to the alleyway. Usk and Voss got to their feet. They heard that one. The battle was beginning, and they readied themselves for a fight. But before they could get their men prepared, the clone commander who served Master Voss turned the corner, taking in a transmission. Commander Fey took in his orders, and before Fey could turn around, Voss used the force to throw the commander from his feet. Usk asked what was happening, but before he could really react, the clones all lifted their blasters, the sound of an order ringing through them continuously on repeat. Execute Order 66. The Jedi ignited their weapons, blocking the blaster shots as they tried to find a way out. Both Jedi were trying to avoid hurting their men, using the force to throw some of them into walls and blocking blaster shots back in the non-critical arteries. Voss told Usk they needed to figure out how to get out of here. They couldn't go down the main street because if they did, they'd be placed between the droids and the clones, who were obviously not on their side at the moment. Before Usk and Voss could figure out where they were going to go, an ATTE shell landed in between the two of them, throwing Quinlan through an adjacent wall and into a living room of an apartment. He looked around, getting up slowly to see if Usk was still alive. He was, though he was disjointed. His arms were clearly broken and he was unable to move. Usk tried to get up as a clone surrounded him. Usk pleaded with them, trying to understand why they were doing this, as Commander Fey came up to him and said that the Republic does not negotiate with traitors, putting his pistol to the Jedi Master's head and pulling the trigger. Voss watched in horror as his clone commander called out to the other men to fan out and execute Jedi Master Quinlan Voss for committing high treason against the Galactic Republic. On the other side of the city, Titus felt the death of his master through the Force, and he was very confused. He was confused until Captain Poison stopped in his tracks and looked over at the Jedi Knight. Titus asked what was wrong, and the clone captain whipped out his pistols and began to fire at the Jedi commander. Titus was quick to react, blocking every shot that came his way. The clones all got the order as they all subsequently followed in unison, all of them firing away at their Jedi commander. Titus blocked as many shots as he could before being clipped in the shoulder and falling backwards. Before he hit the ground, he spun around and used the Force to throw multiple of the men from their feet, before he got up and ran in the other direction. As he exited the alleyway, he looked down the street and saw an AAT barreling for him. The massive tank fired a round, missing, before Titus turned around to block more shots from the other clone troopers. The AAT coming down the street watched as clone troopers led by Captain Poison came running out to kill the Jedi Knight. The droids saw their opportunity and fired. Titus turned around to protect himself before watching his brother be cut apart by a massive shell, killing all the men in the group. On the ground was Captain Poison. He was cut in half by the blast and he was still alive. Titus cried out Poison's name, and the clone turned his head to see the Jedi Knight, and instead of asking for help or apologizing, he reached for his blaster pistol and began to fire at his Jedi friend. Titus moved out of the way, watching as a number of B-1 battle droids filled the streets, before they executed the clone captain and his men. Titus watched in horror as he turned away and ran down the alleyway. He knew his master was gone. He didn't know about Quinlan, and he hoped that his sister was still alive. As far as Titus knew, she was still on the front lines. Titus and Luna hadn't been so close since the war began, even though they were never exactly that close. The war made their bond a little bit more distanced. Titus admitted that he enjoyed being around his sister, but the same was never said for him from her, which was fine. Luna admitted her distaste for her master, and Titus always tried to help with it, though it never made much of a difference in the reality of things. The major issue that came up between the two of them is how Titus embraced the war, and Luna only took part in it to protect the men she served with rather than believing they were doing something right by fighting a continuous war. Despite their differences, Titus hoped that his sister was alright and safe, whichever battlefront she was on. Luna wasn't on a battlefront. She was sleeping cozily inside the temple. Her room was her sanctuary, a safe place away from her master. The night was peaceful, though Luna was jarred from her sleep. She opened her eyes. Everything was blurry. Her bed was very comfy though. She was in her comfy spot, and moving would ruin that, though she wanted to look at the city. She fell asleep during the early day. Her Coruscant sleep schedule was all messed up because of being on the battlefront messed with your sleep schedule, naturally. So she fell asleep early in the afternoon for the second day in a row. It upset her because she loved watching the Coruscant sunsets on the steps of the Jedi Temple. Luna loved Coruscant, because not for nothing, the city lights were beautiful at night. They illuminated the iridescent beauty. The previous night, Luna slept through the entire night. The war wore her out, and she slept for nearly 17 hours straight, so Luna, not wanting to miss anything, got up and looked out her window, with a massive smile on her face. She couldn't help but be happy looking at all of it. Luna grabbed her Jedi robes and put herself together as she walked out of her room. She was heading towards the steps of the temple so that she could take in the beautiful sights again. It had been so long, probably months since she'd seen Coruscant at night. It was the dead of night, but it was still beautiful. And nearly every night she dreamed about being here to see the city again. Luna walked through the temple. It was gorgeous as ever. Something about the temple was so beautiful at night. There was a sort of calm demeanor that the temple held, with its towering presence. Luna smiled as a duo of Jedi walked down the hallway past her. Luna got closer to the Great Hall when she heard a peculiar sound. She couldn't figure out what it was. For a short moment, it sounded like the marching of a droid army, but that couldn't be the case here on Coruscant. The droids were far from Coruscant. There was no feasible way that could be true. Before Luna could finish her thoughts, the sound of blaster fire opened up, and she heard the voices of clone troopers. The sound of bodies hitting the floor could be heard, even from Luna's position. She looked around and saw the two Jedi who she just walked past tell her to go and hide in her room. Everything would be alright. Luna looked at them as they ignited their lightsabers, running over to see what the commotion was. Luna ran back towards her room, though not to hide. She was going to help defend her home from these insurgents, whoever they were. In Luna's tired mind, she still hadn't pieced together that the forces who entered the Jedi Temple were actually clone troopers, even though she heard their voices. When she got back to her room, she grabbed her lightsaber and exited it. There were dozens of Jedi running through the hallways. Luna was curious where the Chosen One was. She knew he was here. Hopefully he was alright. Same with the other few council members still present inside the temple. Luna ran forward, hearing the orders of the temple guardsmen. The guards told Luna to get away from here. As he turned and ran down the hallway towards the action, Luna couldn't just listen to those orders. This was her home, and she needed to defend it from these insurgents. Luna ran towards the Great Hall, and when she got there, she was horrified. On the base layer of the temple, there were a number of clone troopers running through the temple. They were tag-teaming a bunch of Jedi. Luna watched it. It was horrifying. However, it was very impressive. The clones paired up into teams of 3 or 4, and they singled out Jedi. The Jedi were defenseless against it, though Luna found something odd in all this. Yes, something odd aside from the clones betraying the Jedi. It was a 501st Legion, the Legion of Anakin Skywalker. Luna turned her head when a group of clones came running up the stairs near her. 2 Jedi Knights came running by, igniting their lightsabers. The clones fired at them. Luna watched as one of the clones was killed by his own blaster shot, and the other 3 clones began to fire. Another one of them fell over, before 4 more clone troopers ran up the stairs, ambushing the 2 Jedi. One of the knights fell, and then the other one threw his lightsaber forward, cutting down the group of clones, before being shot dead too. Luna ducked down behind the railing after watching the horrific sight. Her breath got heavy. She couldn't fill her lungs fast enough. Her skin trembled and her body shook. A duo of temple guards spun their lightsabers in circles, deflecting shots back to the clones. Luna looked over at the temple guards, and then something horrible, something truly horrific, caught Luna's attention. She watched Anakin Skywalker slam his blade across one of the temple guards. She saw the darkness in his eyes. It was a void, and it sent chills down her entire body. Luna stumbled to her feet, tripping over the dead Jedi and the clones that had just died before her eyes, as she turned back to see Anakin cut through the temple guard's leg, watching him fall to his knees and then cutting across the guard's neck. Anakin spun his blade around behind his back before he grabbed the temple guard by the throat and thrust his blade through him. Luna stopped running and met the cold gaze of Skywalker. The same man that smiled at her just the other day was not the same man she was looking at. His glare sent a chill down her spine, but before he could fully turn his attention toward her, a Jedi Master and Knight came up to him, trying to stop him from committing more atrocities. Luna saw this as her opportunity to escape. Anakin pointed to the side, dispatching some clone troopers to kill the Padawan. Anakin turned his attention to the Jedi, challenging him, and using only a few swift strikes, Skywalker killed him too. He didn't worry about Luna, assuming that she would be killed by the elite men chasing her down. Luna turned around after entering another hallway, igniting her lightsaber and blocking a shot, before using the Force to throw one of the other men into the other. Luna was terrified. Where could she go? She turned around and saw 3 more Jedi running towards her before a thermal imploder flipped onto the ground in front of them, blowing the 3 of them up and killing them. Luna's mouth dropped. She turned around and then looked in the direction of the group of more clones. They fired at her. She used her lightsaber to defend herself, though some of the blaster bolts were smacked into the sides of the pillars. Debris began to fall. Luna used the Force to push over more of the clones before getting clipped in the back of her leg. She fell over, blocking more shots, before the pillar she was next to tumbled over towards her. Luna cried out as the clones watched. The pillar fell to pieces around her, and the largest piece landed on top of the small cocoon. Though Luna had done this almost intentionally, she used the Force to make sure that the last piece of the pillar didn't crush her. She heard the clones say that she was likely crushed by the pillars. Time to move on. Luna stayed under it the entire night. She could hear so many horrendous things, and she covered her mouth to make her cries inaudible, and she wiped tears, several tears away from her face. During the night, she heard the sound of lightsabers cutting through children as they cried, running away from what she had to assume was Skywalker. She heard the sound of a Paloon man, informed the clones that he was serving on the side of the Emperor. The clones referred to him as the Grand Inquisitor. She also heard the sound of several clone troopers reporting different sectors of the temple that were completely covered and dealt with. Luna's heart was so broken. It was the longest night of her life, but as is the cost of winning the Clone Wars. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is part 5 of our story. Again, special thanks to Jack Miller, Gallivant Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Manny Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Cease, Rex the Wolf, the man with 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. Part 6 is coming out next week. I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.